One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
All right, Borin Ironbrow. So this is the 12th part of this set of videos, and it's the last one in the series. So we're painting Borin Ironbrow today, and then we're taking a month off, and we will start a new series of videos in a month's time. Okay. And there's all the stuffs, the brushes, the things, and away we go. Right off the bat, here we go. Let's get her. They line up. So here's Borin Ironbrow. We've got him set up with the sword, but you have an option of a mace or a, is it a mace or a warhammer? A battle axe and a warhammer and a sword are your options. We did the sword. And the plan today is I'm going for a sort of a darker, a little bit more sinister looking dwarf. So we're going to give him a blue-black armor set. We're just going to have some dark gold trim and maybe a little bit of teal, blue-green hitting into the trim as well. And we'll do some things along those lines. Yeah, that's the plan. As always, the mini is available for miniature reapers. This one's available in metal and in bones. This is the bones one though. And there should be a link in the description below once Aaron uploads the videos. So there is the plan. I'm going to go grab my bucket of water and we can launch. There's the water, and away we go. So we'll get him mounted on our happy little painting stand. There he is. So the color scheme for today is going to be a blue-black overall. So we are going to use Reaper's Black Indigo as our black. If you don't have a black indigo, it's okay. You can use Dragon Black, anything like that, and just add some really dark blue into it to get your blue-black. So we're going to use black indigo, and I think the blue we're going to use today is going to be Brionne Blue. 9055 Brionne Blue. You can tell mine's been around for a few years. I think I've probably had this about 12 or 15 years. But I'm just looking for a desaturated, low-value dark blue, and that's going to be it's kind of the highlight color on the armor. And then we are going to damage the armor and give it all kinds of little bits of nicks and damage, and we're going to use honed steel for that. Okay, so these are our armored colors. For this skin, I want like a dark red skin tone, and I'm going to use Reaper's. Oh, I had it ready, but now I don't see it. There it is. Deep red is going to be the lowest color of our skin tone, and I'm going to use, I think. Yeah, we're going to use, let's just try the different kind of skin tone. We're going to use saddle brown, and I think tan skin highlight. So it doesn't matter really, but you don't have to have exact same colors as always, but a dark kind of purpley red, a brick red, a sort of a desaturated brown. That's going to add some brown into our skin tone, and just sort of a pale flesh tone. This one's quite reddish. And for highlighting, I'm going to use creamy ivory as usual. There we go. There's going to be the highlighting colors for our skin tone. So that's our skin. And then for gold, I'm going to try something a little different. I'm going to paint the base coats of the gold with this brown ochre color. This is actually NMM Gold Shadow. And then I'm going to highlight this with Dragon Gold. Dragon Gold. Where are you, Dragon Gold? NMM Gold Shadow and Dragon Gold. It's hiding. this dragon gold. Okay, so the NMM triad, right, that's a very cool triad for doing non-metallic metal gold. But I'm just going to use this for its kind of brown, green, ochre color as a base under the gold. And that's going to darken this gold quite a bit. And hopefully that's going to go well with those armor colors. And that's pretty much our color palette. Oh, I left out the teal side of things. We use a little bit of deep ocean. And you could either use surf aqua or verdigris or what, just some kind of a lighter blue green, and that's going to be our highlight color for over the deep ocean. So that's my plan. That we'll use this as the highlight, and probably paint the stone some different color as we go. So first things first, let's get some black into the palette. Where is it? There it is. Black indigo. Brand new bottle of black indigo. Here we go. A fair bit of that. Hopefully this Brilliant blue is not completely dried up. I do have a backup if it is. It's pretty crusty looking. But again, you don't have to have the exact color. Like any fairly dark, desaturated blue is going to do the job. What we don't want to use is like a bright emerald blue or something like that. Dark blue we're looking for. Wow, that is a crusty jar of paint. Might have to bust out the backup. We'll use. I have midnight blue here. Oh, twilight blue. That'll do the job too. Twilight blue. Twilight blue instead of Brilliant blue because my Brilliant blue kind of died. There we go. That's way too desaturated, but we'll work with it. Then I need a little bit of a lighter color. So we'll use creamy ivory. Just because I like it. And then for our skin tone, we need some deep red. That kind of came into the bottle kind of funny, that one. Saddle brown. Hey Zachariah, how are things with you? Some tan skin highlight. And we got our creamy ivory there, so we're good to go. And then I'm going to use some deep ocean blue. All my paints are getting all crusted up. Weather's a bit funny here in the spring. It's been very, very dry up until yesterday, and yesterday wasn't supposed to rain, but it did. Oh, right on. Yeah, so everything before yesterday was drying so fast it was hard to work with. And today, everything is drying so slow, it's a bit funny. Normally I can do like throw a wash on something and walk away and come back less than a minute later and it'll be bone dry. Not today. Things are taking 5 to 10 minutes to dry, so we'll see how that goes. Could be a bit, could have some impact on our painting. Other than that's going to impact our painting, we got to have some tea. All right, lemon and ginger tea. That'll make me happy. And I think I've got enough paint to get started. All right. So I'm grabbing a fairly good size brush. This is a size 2, this one. And I'm going to start by doing the skin tone. So this guy doesn't have a huge amount of skin. We've got his hands and around his face and his mouth. And I think that this elbow could be done as skin tone. I think that would be fair. It looks a bit more like cloth on the inside in there. So it's really up to you whether you want to do that as skin or cloth. You know what? I can see cloth on the other arm in there. So maybe we'll do that as cloth. All right, so we don't have that much skin tone. I probably have way too much paint on the palette as a result. I'm going to start by grabbing some of the deep red, and this is going to be to make my shadow color. I can grab deep red and saddle brown and mix them together, and it's going to give me a very desaturated reddish gray color. And that is going to be kind of like the undercolor of my skin tone. So I'm going to paint this in around the eye sockets. I'm going to paint this over his nose. I'm going to paint his mouth this color. He's going to have very, very dark black hair. So don't worry too much about making mistakes and getting red on his beard or on his armor at this stage. I'm going to paint those very dark colors. There we go. And we're going to paint his hands this color. He did take the road I take, and I up in the clouds. Been listening to a lot of Miley Cyrus lately, so I apologize if I start singing Miley Cyrus songs while I'm painting. I don't apologize for listening to Miley Cyrus. I just apologize for singing it where people can hear me. So we do have some people working in the studio today. I got my buddy Roger back there. He's doing some terrain work. And we've got another fella in here who's working on Borin Ironbrow, working in the classroom on the other side. I can't remember what your name is again. Nathan. Nathan is back there painting Borin. So if you got questions that you're afraid to ask, don't worry. Roger and Nathan will ask them for you.
Oh yeah.
And if I start singing too much, apology not accepted. What? I don't know. It's a kind of a harsh Twitter crowd out there today. All right. Yeah, it's not happening. They're asking me to sing April Wine. That's just not going to happen.
Can you?
Not well, but that kind of goes without saying, right?
Well, yeah, it does.
Okay, so we're grabbing the black indigo, and I'm going to mix this about 50-50 with my blue color, whatever blue color you like. Doesn't really matter as long as it's a dark blue. And this is going to be the base coat color for the armor. So while we're waiting for that skin tone to dry, we're going to paint this over all the armor. Now the black indigo tends to be a little bit patchy, so we're probably going to have to do 2 coats of this color. But the key thing is just don't overwork any one spot, because as it starts to dry, if it's partly dry and you keep going, you'll end up tearing it up. So just put on a little bit of the base coat and then keep moving forward from there across the armor. And just let things dry fully before going back. We're going to do a second coat of this color. So we have a nice dark base coat. Looks like his boots are leather, so we'll paint those another color. We won't paint those like they're armored boots. The chainmail gets this color. And when you're painting the chainmail, you want to go slowly to make sure that the paint has time to sink in between all the chain links. Otherwise, you might end up with a bit of white primer or something showing through, and that can be a bit frustrating. Now, if that does happen, one of the things you can do is either use like a pre-made wash type paint because it has a lower surface tension and that'll go into the low spots. Or you can use a bit of flow improver to do that. Kind of make your own little wash and then let it flow into those low spots. That's the sort of effect I'm talking about right there. Like right there, there's a spot where the paint peeled back and left a little white spot. That's what you want to avoid. So we'll go back and do a second coat over that. And we might have to put some flow improver on in the paint to get it to go into those low spots. Yeah, so the reason we're painting today instead of on Sunday is because we have a local convention happening. It's called Geequinox. It's in Halifax, the Halifax Forum, on this weekend. And we're going to be there, just hanging out and talking to people. And so I won't be able to do the usual Sunday paint-along as a result. It's funny, I figured that on the weekends there'd be more people hanging out to chat and paint online. But it's funny, every time we do one of these during the week, there's loads of people. You can see this paint is pretty thin. I didn't add any thinner to it or anything like that. It's just naturally fairly thin paint. And that's one of the things I like about Reaper paint versus, say, Vallejo or Games Workshop. It's a paint, comes out of the bottle a little bit thinner. You don't have to add water to it to get it to a consistency that's good for doing basic painting. And it goes on smoothly, dries quickly. Nice even coverage for the most part. That always depends sort of on your brush control and what pigment you're using, whether you get a smooth base coat. But generally speaking, Reaper paints are pretty good for that. You run a paint club on Saturdays and Sundays. Okay, so that makes sense. Look, Scott, you can try to get me to sing April wine songs all you want, but I'm sorry, this afternoon is just not a wonderful time. Okay, the peanut gallery behind me got that joke. I wonder if Scott will get it. Tonight is a one. Oh my God, I started singing it. No! Got an earworm now. Where's Miley Cyrus when you need her? Probably driving some construction equipment. All right, so there we got the base coat painted on the armor. And I'm going to use this same color as a base coat on the sword blade, on the inside of the shield, and on the outside of the shield. Might sound a bit weird, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that it might make sense by the time I'm done. I'm not going to promise that. Just it might. April wine is when I complain that the orders from Reaper haven't arrived yet. That's an April wine. Not because I'm complaining about Reaper's delivery, just I always want more stuff from Reaper. Speaking of getting stuff from Reaper, like I said at the start, I'm taking a month off from these painting sessions. And that's so that I can do a little bit of traveling and take a little bit of a rest also. And we need to identify what the next series of minis are going to be that we're going to paint. So if you have things you'd like us, if you would like us to paint a particular technique or do a particular figure, now is the time to let me know. And that's the kind of thing I need you to mention, like to send me an email or send it to me on Facebook so that I don't lose the messages. And we'll prepare a new list of figures to paint. Will I be going to France at all? Yes, I am going to be going to France. My daughter has finished up her second year, and the way her program works, the third year is done at a different university. So we're getting her moved out and moving on to the next thing. But I'm quite keen on this particular trip because I discovered a painting club in Amsterdam, and we're going to be flying into Amsterdam before we take another plane to go to Nice. And so I'm going to get to go to that painting club, which should be quite fun. And then I also found that one of my favorite painters is doing a workshop in Switzerland. And I am going to go to the painting workshops. I'm very excited about that. And it's very close by to where my daughter lives, so I can do that without really destroying the overall travel plan. Okay, so I'm just working my way around, doing a second coat of blue over all the armor bits. Particularly looking for anywhere that it might have been a little bit patchy, like on the helmet here. A coat of blue on the shield. Yeah, it's pretty easy to get around. The public transport is really good. So to go from where we'll be staying in France to this class in Switzerland is like a 4-hour train ride, and it costs about €50. So that's pretty darn good. And it's Sergio Calvo is teaching a workshop. So I feel very stoked that I'm going to be there at the right time. I've tried to go to his workshops before, and it just never quite managed to work it out. Yeah, pretty excited about that. Okay, so there's our blue, dark blue base coat on everything. Okay, so now let's think, what can we do next? I think we'll do the next coat of paint on the skin tone. So before you do this, just make sure you clean your brush out a little bit. You don't want to accidentally get this blue-black color into the skin tone. Just adjust our focus slightly. There we go. Cool. One of the challenges here is having several chat groups open at the same time. Okay, there we go. Well, thanks very much. That's very kind of you to say that. I just looked at the picture of it, and that is pretty cool. I've got a bunch of projects set aside to work on, and I will add that one to the growing pile. Okay, so for the skin tone, I'm going to grab this saddle brown, and I'm going to add it to my mix that I already had of deep red and saddle brown. So it's not quite as dark as it was. And this is going to be my first layer of skin tone. So I don't want to completely cover over that really dark red. But I do want to put this color over most of the skin. I should have mentioned at the start what my lighting direction was. My lighting on this guy is pretty much almost directly from above, but slightly in front of his face. So something like this. And that just helps to inform the idea of where are my highlights going to go. So the light's shining from about there, just in front of him. Do his fingers. Somehow, Scott, I don't think that's something I'll try. Because, well, maybe it's legal. You escape over the border in Switzerland, but at some point I got to go back. So, yeah, I think I'll hold off on that one. Yeah, and then they can follow you across the border, beat you up. Run away, run! Okay, adding a bit more of the tan. What color was this again? Saddle brown. And I'm due. So now I've got three colors: my original base coat, first layer, second layer. The second layer is just straight saddle brown, giving him a nice rich brown skin tone. And this one is going to be, again, just a little bit smaller than the previous one. There we go. I like it. And don't forget to get a little bit of that color on his lip as well. Now, we want to lighten that skin tone quite a bit. So I'm going to grab that, what color was that? Bronze skin highlight, I think. Tan skin highlight. And I add just a bit of that into our mix. And now we're creating a highlight color for his skin. So bear in mind the light direction, and I'm always sort of doing this systematically in the same way. So I'll do his right hand first. Then I'll do his face, then I'll do his left hand. If it helps to think of it that way, I'm doing his sword hand first, then his shield hand, then his face, then his shield hand. So just a heads up, where it is Friday, and we're having a painting contest here. We've had a few people already come in to drop off their entries for the painting contest. But if I do get some people showing up, which is quite likely actually, then I'm just going to have to mute for a few moments, and I will come back. So as long as this I don't turn the stream off, I will be coming back. Just it might be a few minutes. Yesterday when I was doing the Stormcast Eternals painting, I had somebody come in and they were here for about half an hour. So there's, if you go back and watch that video, there's a long silent spot where the Mini is just sitting there and nobody's talking, nobody's painting. I was talking to customers. All right. Pretty sure Switzerland is part of the Schengen Agreement, meaning that they cooperate on certain things like border control and all the rest of that with other parts of Europe. I'd be very surprised if at this point they don't have some sort of agreement to allow police to cross the border and or coordinate with local police. I'm not saying your dream can't come true, Scott, that you can punch somebody and jump across the border to Switzerland and escape, but I'm not going to recommend it. He does Cappy bases, that's correct, but he also got 2 first places in Golden Demon at Adepticon, one of which was for his Goblin Squig. Okay, so I'm basically using just straight tan skin highlight now. Other similar skin tones to this would be like Reaper's Rosy Skin. New Copper is similar to this, but a lot more saturated, a much brighter color. I mean, there's a bunch of different skin tones that you could use. I was trying to get one that would be a little bit sort of reddish. Wanted this guy's skin to have a little bit of a dark and red undertone. Just doing the sides of his nose, the bridge of his nose. This guy's eyes are really receded. So if you can reach in there to get his eyelids, go for it. You definitely want to get the tops of his cheeks. But his eyes might be a little bit too far to reach in there. And if they think that they are, don't worry about it. Gonna give my guy little beady red eyes. And then, because that's probably not enough contrast to make our skin look the way we want it to, I'm going to go 1 level lighter, and I'm going to put a little bit of creamy ivory into the mix. Lighten that up 1 more level. Top of the cheeks, side of the nostrils. I just have to turn the mic off for 1 sec. Be right back. Okay, so just keep the highlighting focused on the sort of most raised areas, round shapes that the light is going to catch, And so like we got this bulbous round nose, the highlight's going to be quite round on that. Now I'm going to go back down to my deep red, and I'm going to make a very, very thin wash of deep red. And we're going to go back, and I'm just going to kind of line the spaces between his fingers. A little bit more red around his knuckles. Just going to make them look a little bit pink. Mark out his thumbnail. A bit more on the palm of his hand, around his wrist. So anywhere that your hand might have a little bit more pink showing, right, like this. Okay, I want those parts of his hand to be a little bit more red. And that's going to make him look a little bit more alive. Do the lines in between those fingers. A little bit around the knuckles. A bit between the knuckles on the back of his hand. Just a little bit. Give him a little bit more warmth in his skin tone. And then we're going to do the same thing on his face. But what I want to do is, you want to be careful, because this would be a spot where you could end up with some odd looking like tide marks and stuff on his nose. So what I want to do is I'm going to just put a little bit of paint above his nostril and along the bridge of his nose. And I do that on both sides, just to kind of a little bit of color there, and I'm going to put a little bit of this glaze under his nose as well, and just rub it off with my finger so that it stays in the low spots. A little bit at the back of his cheek, on the back of his eye socket. Remember, my guy's going to be having kind of creepy looking red eyes. A little bit more red in there than usual. Now, if you want to give your guy normal eyes, you do you. But my guy's going to have creepy red eyes. There he is. Now, I think the next thing I want to do is paint the different cloth elements with this ocean blue. And that's going to take a couple of coats. Let's get the first coat done. And what we're going to do, we're going to do the cloak. And there's a bit of cloth around his elbows. So we're going to do those this color as well. And you don't have to use this same sort of deep ocean blue or teal blue, whatever it is. You can use whatever color you like. A dark yellow or a dark orange might be a good color as well. It's just to pick out that detail a little bit lighter, a little bit more colorful. Make it stand out. Not so much to make it stand out, I just want it to be visible, right? I don't want it to be mistaken for being part of his armor. I'm going to do this color a couple of times. As usual, sort of work the wet edge of the paint and keep moving along to avoid getting marks like those ones. So I waited too long there, and I've waited too long for these ones. So now when I paint over them, you're going to be able to see a tide mark. See the tide mark right across there? That was from waiting a little bit too long before going back to keep working. There's two things that happened there. One is that the pigment deposited and made a dark line. But also when I went and put the next line of wet paint over top of it, I probably lifted up the edge of that dried paint, flipped it over, and made like a little ridge. And that's why you want to be a little bit careful to try to work in a single direction and not let things dry as you go. It creates like a physical texture in the paint. So I made that mistake. I'm going to have to live with it. It's just the way it goes. I'm trying to decide what color his boots should be. And I feel like they should be like really dark teal. So I'm going to mix some black, and use whatever black you're using. I'm using this black indigo, but you don't have to use the same black. I'm going to mix some of the teal into that. So this is going to be a darker color than what I painted on the cloak. And I'm going to use that to paint the boots. And you just have to trust me that they will look different when we're done. This is going to be a very dark blue dwarf when we're done. And I think I want his belt pouch to be the same dark color. So I'm going to paint his belt pouch that color now too. All right. Strap on the shield. We'll do the strap of the shield this color. And I think the last thing that's going to be this color is the hilt of the sword. There. Okay, just painted a whole lot of stuff that color. And I can see the previous color that I was working on is not dry yet, so I'm going to give that a moment to dry. Giving that a few moments to dry. First thing I'm going to do is go back and do a second coat of the deep ocean blue on the cloak. And anywhere else that I used it. So anywhere you used whatever color you're using for the cloak, cloth, whatever it's going to be, you want to do a second coat of that now. Deal with some of that patchiness. All right. I found quite a cool reference photo that I'm working from to that inspired me to do this sort of blue-black colored armor. And wish I could show it to you, but it's probably copyrighted. But what I really liked about it was like the armor is not really highlighted so much as it is like scratched up and textured up and that kind of thing. And it looks pretty cool. Looks like quite sinister, actually, quite beaten up and battered. And I think that is going to look good on this guy. All right, so there's my blues redone. Oh, I missed one little spot. Let's fix that. Fix that in there. Okay. So at this point, we've got our skin done. We've got the base coat on the armor, base coat on most of the clothing. And now we can start doing some detail. I think I need to do the black on the beard now. So the black on the beard is just going to be the black indigo, or whatever color you're using for black. Just use it straight. So straight black beard. I'm going to have to do at least 2 coats to do this on mine. Now, it's been pointed out to me by people here in the studio that I paint way too fast. So I'm going to slow down a little bit, kind of talk a bit more about what I'm doing. So right now I'm just doing this base coat on the beard. And to do the beard, I'm planning to highlight the overall shape of the beard, any hair really, by very slightly lightening up this color to create highlights. And one of the tricks about painting black is that you want most of the object or the shape to be black. If you highlight it with highlights that are too big, it stops looking like black and it starts looking like whatever your highlight color is. So if you're highlighting with gray, it starts to look gray. Highlighting with blue, it starts to look blue. Red, whatever, etc. So we want the highlights to be quite small when we're doing that. So this indigo is quite a transparent black. So I'm going to have to do another coat of that color. And that's okay. So while I'm waiting for that to dry, all right. I know I'm going to be painting some stuff gold. Don't do that now. No, I guess I'll wait to do that for a minute. Okay, so we've got our blue-black mix that we use to do the armor, and I'm going to start lightening it up. Okay, so I've got this twilight blue. I'm going to start adding that into my blue-black mix, and that's going to give me a slightly lighter, slightly desaturated color. And the plan is to gently, slowly highlight up those other shapes, sort of the armor shapes, so they look kind of highlighted. Okay, that's what I'm aiming for. Let's go back. So I'm going to start by putting a highlight on the helmet, and there's a little metal bit that holds the horns in place. We're going to highlight those. Do some of this on the top of the helmet. And then we're going to work our way around the various armor plates. So this round armor plate here, going to put a bit of that at the top. And just keep in mind which way our light is coming in, right? Our light's shining from that side. So as I'm highlighting, that's what I'm keeping in mind. So like these plates here, do these next. The light's coming that way, so I'm just going to do the center part of those plates. Top of that rivet, the middle of that plate, where it's facing directly towards that light source. And you notice I'm just kind of dabbing the paint in. So this armor is going to look quite battered when I'm done. And all these little marks that I'm putting on, like scratches, I'm focusing them more towards the center of these plates. So that's where the apparent highlight is going to be. He's got this sort of shield-shaped bit on his chest here. Now, the beard is going to cast a shadow on those, so you can't see much detail in the shadow. But the light is kind of coming down and hitting this lower central part of the plate. So I'm going to put a bunch of dashes and marks and things on there. You might notice that the sculpt has a few little scratches and things in it. You want to highlight the edges of those. And we're just going to keep doing this with progressively lighter paint. And the shape will become visible. So we'll do that on this plate alongside of his neck. This bit of his chest plate here, close to the center. Hello, how's it going? We are all right. Okay, so continue to highlight these plates. Look at this plate around his arm here. It's a bit hard to see because of all the blue. See you in the morning, dude. But with the light coming that way, that round shape is going to be highlighted facing towards the light. So we'll put some dabs on there. Same with the armor plates on his shoulders. Just kind of dab the most highest raised spots. These are not meant to be like beautiful, perfect, round highlights. We're just kind of dabbing, dashing, and making like a texture. And the reason for that is it's going to be very battered armor. And at the end, we're going to put a whole bunch of chips and damage in there, and put like some shiny silver flecks in the middle of them to show where the metal is showing through, like the black stain on the armor. We're going to do the same thing on the rim of the shield. So the rim of the shield facing towards the light means basically like this top half along like there. It's going to get a highlight. And we'll do the outside edge of the shield back here as well. This round shape, it's going to get a round highlight. Basically the top 2/3 of it is going to be highlighted. And the top of that little shield boss. Highlight each of the rivets. There we go. A little bit along that rim at the bottom. All right, did we miss anything? Did we do his wrist gauntlet? I can't remember if we did or not. Doesn't hurt to do it again. And he's got another one in there behind that strap on the shield. All right, and then we're going to do the sword as well. So the sword blade is going to be lighter towards the bottom. We're doing a very simplified version of this today. There's the light source. So the bottom of the sword is closer to the light. So we're just going to put little light colored dash marks along the sword blade. We'll do the same position on both sides. So it's going to be darker towards the tip on the side facing upwards, lighter towards the bottom, and we're going to do it the reverse on the bottom of the blade. Why? Because I feel like it. Does it follow any rules? No. I'm going to do the bottom of the sword blade and the part further away from the hilt. And that's going to give us an appearance of sort of strange reflecting light. And this guy's a bit of a creepy evil guy. Well, that's what we're looking for. Okay. Now, you can just maybe see a little bit of that highlight starting to show right there on the shield. Okay, now we're going to do all of that again with one step lighter of color. So we add some more twilight blue to the mix. Make it quite a bit lighter. And we're going to do all that again. And anywhere that we were making marks before, we do it again, but just do a little bit smaller. So like on his helmet, we're going to do the same sort of pattern of round marks. Scratches and dents and all that sort of thing. But instead of doing it over like the whole front of the helmet, we do it in a smaller area. And you don't want it to be a really nice regular pattern. We want it to look kind of battered. So just marks and dashes here and there. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then this top of the shoulder in there, we do the same thing. We're down to these armor plates below, and where there's the light, so the center of those plates closest to the light is going to get these marks. Just kind of dabbed and dashed, all random directions. Change the direction of the brush. Just kind of poke them in there. Top of the rivets, along the edge of the plates. And now we're starting to get a kind of a battered looking armor plate in there. Remember, we got that shadow under the beard, so we're going to do this a little bit out from that, but concentrating towards the center of the plate. There's the chest armor plate. Same thing, close to the beard. Light coming that way. Bit of a line down the middle of the armor right there. Now these plates, the light's coming that way, so the edge of these plates is going to be lighter. But the bit in the back in there is probably going to reflect the cloak a little bit, so we're not too worried about that. We could always put a few little marks of teal on there to show that like the light of the cloak is being reflected, but we don't need to do that right now. Right now we're just bringing out that battered and abused black and blue color of the armor. Top of the plates on his shoulders, same idea. But again, this highlight made up of irregular marks and dashes and gouges. A little bit smaller than the previous one. Just going to dab them in there. Wiggle the tip of the brush in there. Same on that bracer on his armor. Just going to wiggle it in there. Okay, so now we're on to... We've done the front of those plates of armor. Move it along the collar. We're going to do the top of the shield. So the shield, remember we did kind of the top half. So we'll do a little bit less than half. And it's the part of the shield facing towards the light, like that. And all of these rivets and things in a circle here. So there's our slightly lighter circle already. All of these marks should be inside the previous marks that we did. So instead of doing about 2/3 of the shield, maybe we're only doing about half the shield now. The same idea, all battered dings and dashes and bits. It's all kind of... This guy's a hard-working fighter. Fights in the dark. So his shield takes lots of hits. Just work our way around the edge. And same thing, all these little rivets get a little bit of a highlight, and the bottom edge of the shield needs a little bit of a highlight too. There we go. You can start to see that coming up. You can see that highlight pretty clear in there now, actually. And then we got to do the same thing on the sword. Now remember, on the sword, the lower part of the blade close to the hilt, so the part closer to the light source, is where we put our light marks last time. So we'll do the same position, just a little bit, start a little bit closer to the hilt. So if you started there, this time start there. And just make little dashes along the blade to show that it's getting lighter closer to the hilt. We do that on both sides of the sword. Flip them over, do it on the back. We'll do it in there as well. Now so we did that part of the blade. Now we want to do the opposite part of the blade on the lower half. So the lower half of the blade, our little dash marks go out towards the tip. So it's getting lighter further away from the hilt. So you might be wondering, why did I choose such a battered looking, beat up color scheme? Well, one of my favorite paint jobs on this guy was done by Ian Marcon, Kuro Clean Brush, really good painter. And he paints very, very cleanly. And his model that he did, his studio model of this guy, is so clean, it's beautiful. And I was thinking I wanted to do something kind of like the opposite of that. So this color scheme is going to have similar sort of highlighting in terms of the direction of light and how he's highlighted. But instead of being clean, he's going to be very, very beat up and rough. And Ian's is very light, it's very bright. Mine is going to be very, very dark. Have I played any games lately? I've been playing a lot of Aristea, actually. Quite like that game. In fact, we're going to have a an official Aristea day here in the studio in a few weeks. It's, I don't. When people know how to play it, you can play it quite quickly, and it's fun. All right, so I'm going to mix a little bit now. So I want to go progressively lighter with this mix. So I'm going to mix some of the creamy ivory in there. Go one step lighter, and we're going to go quite light with this. But at this step, we don't want to go too extreme just yet, but we're going to eventually. Now, we can do all those same things again, and smaller than we did before. So we look back at the helmet again, and we want to look for it. So there's the little pieces that are holding the horns on at the edge. So those get a little bit of like kind of dings and marks on the curve of them, facing up towards our light. Both sides, both horns. And then we've got this shape of his helmet, and we want to have this marks and dashes and dings and things kind of centered on the part of the helmet which is closest towards the light. We don't want to just paint a big round highlight on there. We want to create the impression of a round highlight by putting all these little battered marks on there. So it's like a zone of battering, and that's going to give us a highlight. We do the same thing now on the shoulders. And the smaller you can make the dashes and lines, the better overall it's going to look. It might start to look a little bit like distressed leather, and that's okay. But when we go and we add those little bits of silver in towards the end, that's going to sort of change the impression of it from being leather or something like that to being metal. Center of these plates as well, working our way down. We want to make sure we get a little highlight of this. Each time we do one of these lighter highlights, you want to make sure you get all those rivets and the edges of the plates as well. We're slowly building up color in the center of the plates. And along the edges. You notice we haven't had to do anything particularly difficult in terms of blending or anything like that on this. And that's one of the things I like about this sort of stippling approach, is that we can get the impression of highlighting, the impression of a smooth color transition, but without actually having to do any difficult blending. So what you're doing, you're still training your brush control, you're practicing how to paint details, you're practicing your paint thinning, all those good skills. You're thinking about the lighting. But the most difficult skill, that blending skill, takes a long time to develop. And what you're doing here, you are working on developing your blending skill. But it doesn't stop us from learning the other things at the same time that we need to know. All right, so that plate on his chest gets the same thing. Highlight there close to the edge of the beard. A little bit of a rivet along the edges. And now in his chest armor, you can see there's like a band of armor. And at the bottom, there's like a little curl of metal. We want to make sure we highlight those separately now so that we don't lose that shape in the shadows. Or lose the shape in the highlight, I guess would be the case. This plate here along his leg, we want to paint little marks on the front edge closest to a light. Make sure we pick out the edge. Little marks. There we go. Plates on his shoulders. And the plate on his arm, same deal. Concentrating that little pile of marks close to where we want the highlight to be. How long have we been going? About an hour. Okay. Lots of time left to finish this guy. Okay, there he is. And now we're going to keep going on the sword blade. So on the sword blade, we want to start a little bit closer into the hilt one more time. And we're just doing all these marks basically parallel to each other on the blade. There we go. We do that on both sides. And then out towards the tip. On the bottom of the blade. That distinction should be pretty clear now. And the reason that we're doing them opposite from each other is it'll make the sword look cooler. And that's the only thing that matters. It looks cool. There we go. I feel like I need a few more up on his helmet. There we go. I forgot to do the shield. We'll do the shield this color now. So that curve at the close to the top of the shield. Lots of little dabs and dashes and marks. And then the back of the shield, so all along that rim. All these rivets. A bit of the center of that shield boss. And that kind of gives you a sense of where the highlight should be. Okay, based on that, on the shield boss. So we're going to do that same idea out in this zone out here. Give the impression of a highlight. Almost like the light is catching the edge of all these irregular, battered bits and shapes in the armor. There we go. No, part of what I'm doing is putting base coats on, allowing them to dry where we're doing this bit of detail work. So I need to stop that for a moment. I need to do another coat of teal on that cloak because mine is very patchy. And I need to do another coat of the black on the beard. So I'm going to do the black on the beard first. And then we're going to do the blue on the cloak. Well, was doing pretty good until I painted his hand blue. That was not intended. So I'm going to fix those marks on the knuckles. Grab some of my tan skin highlight there and fix those blue dots I put in by mistake. There, good as new, nobody will know the difference. There's no proof it ever happened. There's no video recording that anybody can refer back to, nothing like that, so I'm good. All right, I'm going to go another color lighter on the shield, so add a bit more of that what did I pick? Creamy ivory into the mix. So it's going to be quite a bit lighter. There we go. And same pattern again. So little bits of marks. Oh, I got way too much paint on my brush. Little dots and dents and dashes on the little bits holding the horn in place. And then helmet as well. Remember, you want this to be irregular, and the overall concentration of them should look like a highlight, but you don't want to completely obscure the color underneath. Okay, so there we go. We get a little bit of an irregular highlight built up. Same thing along the edges of these shapes. Edge of the helmet. And now we want to do that on the armor as well. So these plates along his shield arm. And just look for the highlight you did last time and put your new set of marks inside the center of mass of that sort of zone of slightly lighter color. That's what we're looking to do. And do the same thing on his leg. I'd forgotten it's Friday, so that just as a heads up, you're probably going to start hearing lots of weird background noise to the mic as the gymnasium downstairs starts having their Friday workout session. It comes right through everything. All right, rivets. Chest armor plate, and then we're looking at the edge of that plate. Do a few little dots along there to pick it out. And this is where we want to make sure we highlight those little ridges separately from each other. Define the shape with little bits of scuff mark and dots and dashes and things. Same thing on all these rivet bits back here. On the edge of that buckler. Last time I forgot the shield. This time I won't forget the shield. So work along the rim of that. And it's okay to go outside the boundary of your previous highlight, but you want the overall concentration of the marks to be in the center of where you want your highlight to be. And that should, generally speaking, face pretty much straight towards your light source in this particular case. Rivets on the back of the shield. Okay, and we want to do the sword the same way. Oh, somebody's trying to talk to me. Nope, good. Okay. So next step on the sword. So that same approach, the blade, that lighter zone, about half of that lighter zone, we start putting these light colored streaks into the middle of it. Slightly longer one along the spine of the sword. We'll reverse the sword and do it again. This time headed towards the tip. There we go. And now we want to do that on the other side. Go. A few extraneous marks and scratches here and there for fun. Okay, and what is next? It looks pretty good. Gonna give that a moment to dry, and I need to redo the blue on the cloak. I did the beard already. The beard's looking good. Give the cloak another coat. So if you're feeling frustrated by this, like a sort of a patchy base coat like this, there's a couple of different approaches you can take. One is just what I'm doing here, and that's just patiently reapply the color until you get a smooth coat. And sometimes that's going to take a few coats. It might take 2 or 3. It might take 6, and that's just kind of the way it is. And that depends on what color of paint you're working with. They're all slightly different. Another approach is to mix that paint with another one, either with a black or with a white or something like that, to give the color better coverage. So you could say with this blue, we could mix it with black and then apply it, and that would give us better coverage for the base coat. But you know, I'm willing to just be a little bit patient and give it the time it takes to put a few extra coats on there. Quite happy with that. Okay, now we're going to go lighter yet on our armor and on our sword. So what I want to do, I'm going to grab some white. I'm going to grab my solid white here. Check that in there. And I'm going to grab creamy ivory first, add the creamy ivory into the mix. Quite a bit lighter. I'm going to do all my little marks and things again. Really just one or two little ones to really bring out the shape. They don't need much. Same thing on the helmet. A little round pattern of dense concentration of little white marks. Same thing on the shoulders. Okay, this plate, same idea. Working on the chest plate again. Down along those shapes that we want to keep separate. Oh, advertising's back on. Okay. Do the same color on the sword. Then on both sides. Oops, sorry, went off the screen. There we go. And on that bracer. And the shield. go. All right. I'm pretty happy with that. So if you're doing something like this and you discover that maybe you've made something too light, for example, and you'd rather have like you want to darken it back down again, you can just grab one of your darker colors and go back in and kind of work those marks and things back into the edge of the things you already. So you could put some darker marks over the medium ones, and the overall look is going to be made darker again. So you can just kind of adjust if you need to, or if you didn't make your highlight big enough, you can go back to sort of a middle color, expand the size of the highlight. All right. Now we're going to do his hair. So for the hair, we did a base coat of black. So we're going to grab, I'm just going to use straight creamy ivory now. I'm going to add a touch of that in there. That's going to turn it kind of a purpley gray color. And that's going to be my first highlight on the beard. So I'm looking for anywhere that there's an outward curve. So if my hand was the beard, right, I'm looking for a curve like that where the shape is rounded outward, so convex. And the striations, I'm just going to ignore the striations for now. I'm going to paint that whole thing as a single highlight. And that's, so we're painting like the volume of the shape as opposed to trying to paint every individual piece separately. So like on the mustache there, just give it a nice big highlight on that round part. Same thing on these bits at the back, just one connected highlight all the way across. This piece of the beard is all one big piece. There's another big piece. Outward curve of those pieces. There's another one there. There's the outward curve. Great big one there. Just paint, highlight on the outside curve. Now, if you make these highlights really, really big, it stops looking black and it starts looking, well, in this case, they'll start to look purple. So we want to keep these highlights quite small. And what we're going to do is add some more creamy ivory into the mix. And this will be our second highlight. Now, this is really light by comparison. So we want to keep these highlights quite small, but they go in the same position. So on the mustache, I'm going to put one, basically a connected line highlight along the outside curve. There's a little bit of an outside curve there and there as well. This piece has an outside curve, so we'll put a highlight across that. This piece is all basically like the same sort of straight shape. We'll put the curve or the highlight right across the middle of all of those together. This one is a big curve, so we'll put the highlight in the center. Another one there, highlight on the outside of the curve. There. This long piece here is a curve. Do it on the outside of that. Now we're doing these smooth connected highlights because that'll make the beard look very distinct from the armor. It'll make it look kind of smooth and shiny. So I'm going to add a bit more creamy ivory to that mix. Why is it necessary to smash the wall downstairs like that? Okay, so now we're going to do another highlight on the beard and the mustache, and make this one about at least half the size of the previous one. We're looking for a small, tight little highlight like that, just to reveal the outside edge of the curves. That right in the center of those outwards curves. Okay, there we go. There's all those curves in the beard. I'm going to go one step lighter, almost straight creamy ivory. And this is going to be the lightest highlight on our beard. Again, very small, tight highlight connecting all those shapes. There we go. And now it's almost indistinguishable from the armor, but the next step, we'll separate it back out again. So what we're going to do now is a glaze of your black. So I'm using the black indigo. I'm going to thin it down so that it's maybe 2/3 water, 1/3 paint. So this is going to be my glaze. Something like that. Okay, so it's quite transparent. And I'm going to run this slowly over the top of that stuff I just painted so that the dark color goes into the texture in between the shapes. But those highlights that we made, as this paint dries, those highlights are going to show through this. So the volumes that we created in the beard, that rounded shapes of hair, are still going to show up. They're not going to be quite as extreme as they look at the moment. So we're not like base coating over top. We're just putting this thin layer over. And by moving the brush fairly slowly, kind of wipe it off the highlight and let the paint go into the low spots. And we're left with a beard that looks quite black, but a little bit shiny, like hair. And that's what we wanted. It was quite distinct. And I'm happy with that. Okay. Now, the next thing we need to do, we're going to start, oh, sorry. So I switched to doing that to allow the armor and the sword to dry a bit. Now what we're going to do is we go to that blob of pure white that we put onto the palette a moment ago. I'm going to mix that into my armor colored mix. So quite a big blob of white into there. I don't want it to be pure white. I want it to be just a little bit tinted by the previous mix of color. But this is going to be kind of a very light highlight on our armor and our sword. And this is when it's going to start to look shiny. Oh, you can hear that coming through. Excellent. I love it when that happens. So, small highlight with this light white color. There we go. On the opposite side of the blade as well. There we go. And same thing on the back of the blade. There we go. I'm going to do a little bit of an edge highlight, so I'm going to use the edge of the brush close to the tip. I'm going to run it along the spine of the sword, just to make a slightly more distinct line. Same thing on the front. Okay, there we go. I'm going to do that on the shield and in a couple of select spots on the armor as well in just a second. So I'll do a little bit on the shield. This is the same very light color I used on the sword. All right, now I can start doing some of the gold stuff I was talking about. So I'm going to put a coat of this NMM gold base. So that paint is basically fallen apart on the palette. So I'm going to mix some saddle brown into it, thicken it up a little bit. All I really need is sort of a dark brownish color as an underpaint, so the gold is going to look okay when I paint the metallic gold over it. Put that on the pommel. And on the hilt of the sword. Okay, here we go. Okay, I'm going to give my cloak a little bit of highlighting. Nothing too serious. So I'm going to take my blue here. I'm going to add just a bit of this, I don't remember what color I used, copper verdigris. I'm going to mix that in there to get a highlight color. And I'm going to highlight this with a cloth texture. So how I'm going to do that, I'm just going to basically, anywhere that there's a rounded upward shape, I'm going to put a line on it crosswise. And this is the basis of my cloth texture. So little marks across first, and all these round shapes. Okay. And then I'm going to connect them all together with some vertical lines. So I'll start right here in the middle. Follow the cloak. Just put a few little vertical lines there to show the cloth fabric. Doesn't have to be perfect. Just enough to give the impression that there's a coarse weave there. Now, normally I would restrict this to like the intermediate zone between the shadow and the highlight, but the whole back of this cloak is in shadow. So essentially my mid-tone zone is the highlight on the cloak. Okay, so now I've got a little bit of a highlight on the cloak that was created by this little pattern that we did. Doesn't have to be perfect, just enough to show the weave. And we can do the same thing along the edge on the inside. Just a few little hash marks along there to show the texture, and do that on both sides. Just little straight lines. And then one or two vertical lines as well. There we go. And now we've got a little bit of a texture going in there. Okay, the hilt of the sword, I'm going to do this color again. This gold color. This ochre color. Need to be a little bit more solid opaque than that. Okay. And I need some kind of a pattern to paint on the shield. I think we're going to give it like a, I don't know, some sort of a triangle shape maybe. Doesn't matter. You could do whatever shape you want. I'm going to do a triangle. And my triangle is going to be point down, I think. So I'm just going to paint a big triangle on the shield. Right over top of everything we already did. I'm going to repaint this 3, 4, 5 times until I have a nice opaque color. There we go, I got the triangle visible, and that's going to be like his coat of arms color. I think I'm going to also paint this color as the color of the tip of his horns. So I'm going to start about halfway up the horns. I'm going to pull this color from the middle of the horns out towards the tip. Horns tend to be, I mean, as a natural material, they don't really have a set particular color. They can be just about any color you want. And I don't want it to be particularly bright, so I'm going to use this color just to darken the tips of the horns a little bit. I see that the direction of my brush strokes is always pulling towards the tip of the horn, and that means I get a gradient from the base of the horn, where there's a little bit of this color, not too much, out to the tip of the horn where the color is almost opaque, and that gives me kind of a convincing looking horn. There we go. Now, are we ready for the next step, I wonder? Yeah. I think I need to paint these little blobbies here that same color. The little blobbies, I mean, are the handle on the shield. I'm going to give them a gold color as well, just so that they're painted. Okay. Now, we can paint those gold. I'm going to paint the strip in the arm on the shield one more time. It's not quite dark enough. There we go. Okay, I'm ready for the gold. So I'm going to grab my dragon gold now. I'm going to shake it up really, really well, because these gold colors tend to be kind of horrible. I'll put a little bit of that in the palette, right there in the middle. So this is Reaper's Dragon Gold. It's a pretty good kind of bright orangey gold. It's going to be an interesting looking color on this figure. And I'm going to be painting the pommel of the sword, the hilt of the sword, and that those few little bits of the shield this color as well. So we got the hilt. Now, because these metallic paints are all somewhat transparent, the color you paint underneath them has quite an influence on what they look like when they dry. So by putting that ochre color underneath, we're going to make the gold look a little bit kind of more red, more yellow. Whereas if we painted it over black, it would tend to look a little bit more greenish, a little bit more dull. There we go. The little shield bits now. There we go. And we're going to paint that mark on the shield that we painted, the little crest. Put a line of this gold right down the middle of that triangle I already painted. You want to do this a couple of times, make sure I get a nice smooth shape, which are all kind of the same width. There we go. Okay. So we've got our sword painted, we've got our marks on our shield, we've got our cloak, all that stuff done. Now, some of this, like, I wanted this guy to be really dark, right? To be really kind of grim looking. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to darken up some of this stuff again so he goes back to kind of being kind of hard to see. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to first I'll do the cloak. For the cloak, we use this, what was this color called? Deep ocean, right? So I'm going to make a glazed consistency of the deep ocean. So it's about twice as much water as paint, say 2 dollops of water, 1 dollop of paint. It's going to be fairly thin, maybe even a little bit more water than that. And then where I did this, all these marks, I'm going to slowly paint a thin layer of this color over top of all that. And that's going to make all those marks a little bit harder to see. And this is, you do this with any sort of freehand or texture, that kind of thing, so that it makes it look like it's more part of the material rather than something painted onto the surface of the material. So I'm pushing this blue down across all those marks that I made. And bear in mind, this is the shadow side of the figure, right? So we want those to kind of recede. And now he's got a... If it's too thick, you just keep pulling it down and pull it off of the shape so that it disappears. There we go. And now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to glaze, but this next glazes is going to be my my indigo, and I'm going to glaze all the armor plates, the helmet, all those things with a very thin layer of this indigo. I'm going to start a fresh pile of it over here. There we go. And I put some water in there, thin it down. Now, I'll do this one a little bit more slowly so you can see how I'm doing this. The key is that I want to go across the textures, but I don't want to end up parking a big blue blob in the middle of the texture. So I start at one side, I push my way across, and then where I lift the brush is going to be off the side close to the shadow. So for example, these plates right here, they're already shadowed at the back, but they're light at the front. So I'm going to start by the front with my glaze. I'm going to go across them slowly. You can see it's darkening those down, but I push the paint off of them towards the shadow. And as that dries, it's going to dull down all that texture, and that blob that's created where I lift the brush off is sitting on top of indigo at the back. So we don't see like a coffee stain or anything like that because it's on top of something which is already a very dark color, the same color as the paint in the brush. Okay, so you see the difference between these areas and these areas. These look battered and slightly lit, whereas this looks kind of coarsely lit. So that's what we're doing now. We're going to put this glaze over all the armor. So I'll do the plate on his chest, same idea, start on one side. I pull the glaze across. And on this one, I'm going to go right off the top and I'm going to push that blob into where the belt would be. So I push it right up against the beard and then off the side into that little crevice. So I don't end up parking a blob of paint on the top of anything. Same thing on his chest. I'm going to start in by the beard, pull out, and then push the paint down into the shadow. I could do it the other way on this chest plate. I could start at the outside edge and then push it in so that the drop of paint ends up pushed up against the side of the beard, because remember the beard is that same color already. So you have a couple of options of the direction you want to go, but the key is you put a thin film of the paint across the textures and then push the excess paint off into the shadows. And that helps tie everything everything together. Always good to think about where your exit strategy is for that blob of paint before you start. And if in doubt, just ask yourself, where is the shadow on the model? And that's the direction I want to go. So we look at these ones up in his upper shoulder here. That's a bit more of a challenging one. Which way do you go? I'm going to pull them down into the edge of his beard. Pull them down like that. But you could just as easily push them the other way if you wanted to. Either way would work. There you go. For the helmet, I'm going to start at the front, and I'm going to push the color backwards across the helmet into the shadow. Push it right across to the back. There we go. Do the same thing on those little bits beside the horns. So looking quite dark now, but all the highlights are still visible through that glaze. Do the same thing on the ones on his leg. Film of paint, pull it across, push it into the shadow. Okay. The shield's a little bit tougher. I'm going to start right at the top of the shield. I'm going to go all the way around, pushing that little blob of paint ahead of me. Keep pushing it, pushing it, pushing it, pushing it, pushing it, right down to the bottom. And then I can do the back of the shield the same way as I did the other areas. So I'll start the shadow side over here, go all the way across the whole shield, all the way across, right across all that metal, across everything, and then pull it down into the lower part of the shield at the bottom and let it dry there. Now, sometimes when you do that, you end up making a mess at the top, and you just want to go and clean that back up. There we go. And last but not least, of course, we want to do that on the sword blade. With the sword blade, I'm going to start out by the point. I'm going to push it all the way in and leave a dark line at the hilt. Okay, so I'm going to start right out at the sword tip. I'm going to push it all the way in, right up against the hilt. And do that the same way on both sides. I'm going to do that on the back of the sword as well. Just keep pushing it, pushing it, pushing it down right into the hilt. Okay, now we got to let that dry for a moment. While we're letting that dry, we can think about our other areas of gold. So we got that little bit of gold on the handle of the shield. We're going to put this over that as a wash. We're going to let that just flow over that gold and dull it down. Put that on both parts of that shield handle. There we go. And then sword handle the same way. Pommel. And the hilt. Now the hilt has these little gemstone shapes. You can let the wash flow in around those shapes and kind of outline them in a dark paint. We're going to come back and highlight this again. A little bit more gold in a moment. There we go. Pretty happy with that. Our dark dwarf is looking pretty dark. Good stuff. Now we need to give him a little bit of battle damage and that sort of thing. So this is what I was talking about earlier with my doing some metallic. So what we would do is we're going to get a little bit of honed steel. I'm going to put that somewhere in this giant mess of a palette. Make sure we... Thanks, Solar Wind. I appreciate you saying that. we're going to put a little bit of this silver in our palette. And that's what we're going to use in a moment. So I'm going to start by putting some black lines as like bits of damage in various places on the armor and the shield, that sort of thing. So I'm going to grab some straight black indigo, roll my brush into a point, and I'm going to put some damage. So let's start on the shield. I'm going to put a slash mark on the shield, kind of right across this triangle shape that I painted. Put a black line like that, and a little ding of it down there, and a little ding of it in the edge of the shield. So like he got hit by an axe or a sword or something there. We'll do another one up here in the edge, like that. There's another bit of damage there. So we get a couple of chunks taken out of that, and I'm going to do another one across the triangle. And we'll put a little chip, 2 little chip dots there in the edge of our little pattern that we made, so it looks a little bit more beat up. Okay, so what's the silver for, you're saying? You did all that with your black paint. So the black paint is the shadow. And now we're going to use the silver paint to show the fresh metal on the edge of those chips and cuts. So I'll start with the first one that did. The light is shining on it this way. So the top is in shadow, the bottom is going to get a silver metal highlight. So we'll just go along the bottom of it, draw a fine line of silver. Along the bottom edge of that shadow, where that gouge was. So our dwarf has his blackened metal armor, but where he got hit with an axe or a sword or whatever it was, it cut down through into the shiny metal and left a gouge. Do the same thing on this other one. Remember, the light's at the top, so the highlight of the scratch goes on the bottom. There we go. Do another one there. Bottom of each of these chips. And these cuts as well. Get a little bit of bling on the bottom of them. Now, they don't stand out a huge amount, but in certain light, they're going to catch and they're going to glint and they're going to look like fresh metal. And that's what I want it to do. Now, what do you do if you make the silver mark too big? You go back to your black color, whatever you're using for black, and you can tighten up those marks just by repainting your black a little bit. Cut in a little bit on the silver, make them look a little bit finer. You can do the same thing if you made your silver or your black too big. You can cut in with the silver, make the black a little smaller. There we go. There we go. There's our battered shield with its gold triangle painted on it. And what else can we do? Let's do some... We could paint these as gems, but I think today I'm just going to make little black lines around them so they look like gold ornaments. Now we could do these rivets on this bracer. We can make them look like they've been battered a little bit by putting little silver chips on them. I think I'm going to put one mark on that. It cuts across this way. So there's my scratch on the bracer. I'm going to paint the edge of that with silver. I'll use a smaller brush. Where's my tiny little brush? There we go, a tiny brush. Now these Reaper metallics are pretty good, but my personal favorite is the Vallejo Game Air Silver. I find that to be really the best flowing overall of any metallic paint. And that's quite often the color I would use to do this sort of detailing. We could do a few links of the chainmail like that. Just a touch here and there on the outside of a couple of links. Try not to pick like a regular pattern of links, just do one or two here and there on a curve which faces upwards to make it look like maybe some of them have a little bit of damage to them. There I made a very perfectly regular pattern, which is what I had intended not to do. It's a little bit less regular now. If you do end up making a regular pattern, you can always just go back and paint some of them dark again. And what else can we put? Oh, his helmet. His helmet definitely needs some battle damage. We're going to put an axe dent right across the crest of his helmet, right above his eye, like this. Gunk. There we go, right above the eye. He's going to have a bit of a scratch there. After all, his name is Ironbrow. So even if his helmet gets cracked, his skull is still going to be strong. Do this across like that. There we go. Nice fresh scratch in his helmet. Bonk, somebody hit him in the head. And I mean, you can do as many of these as you want, wherever you want. Everybody has their own personal preference for how many to do, if any. Like you could even just be satisfied and leave his armor as matte black, or this dark blue black we've got going on here. Or you can chip the heck out of it, whatever you prefer. All right, I feel like that's enough. Now, one last trick we could try. We've got this really cool effect going on the sword. It looks like a pretty sharp blackened steel sword. And I've never tried this before, but it's been recommended to me as a technique. I'm going to make a glaze of metallic silver. And I'm going to use that glaze to make the highlight of that sword gleam. So here's what I'm doing. It's about half water, half paint. Maybe more water than paint. A little glaze of metallic silver. I'll show you my finger what it looks like. Oh, that's too thick still. Let's thin that a little bit more. There we go. That's more like it. Just basically like metallic water in a sense, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to glaze that onto the highlights on the sword. So I'm going to do that on this tip first because that's the easy way to do it. That's the easiest one to work on. And I'm not going to reach right down to the sword blade. I'm going to start out close to the tip, and I'm going to pull my brush strokes towards the tip of the sword. Now, that's already a very light color there. And this is just going to add some natural reflectiveness to that zone, which is already a very light color. And see how that, like, compare those two spots, right? That one has a gleam to it that this one does not. So we'll do that on the other side as well. And we'll pull that in towards the bottom, but we don't want to cover up that nice line we painted at the base of the sword hilt, so just be cautious of that. And now we've got a nice sort of gleaming sword blade. And we'll do that on the back as well. That's interesting. Like I said, I've heard about this technique many times. I've never tried it. I kind of like the look of it. And we'll go the other way. Way on the screen, yeah, on the other tip of the sword. Cool. I like that. I like the look that gave that. Fancy shiny sword for our grimdark little dwarfy dude. Okay, so then what are we left with? We could give him glowing red eyes. I'm kind of tempted to give him glowing red eyes. We've got a few little zones that need some highlighting, like his boots and his belt pouch could use a little bit of highlighting. I think for the belt pouch, I'm going to add a tiny bit of this copper verdigris into our blue-black mix that we made for the leather boots. Just a touch of it. There we go. And I'm going to just do some little tiny dots along the edge of that belt pouch where it might get roughed or scuffed. And that's going to be my battered looking little leather belt pouch. I'm liking this guy. I think I could play this guy as a D&D character. He's a dark dwarf with dark tidings for dark times. I bet you everybody would think he was a fighter, but he's really a warlock. I get a bad feeling he gets his magical power from a beholder master or something like that. Just feel the bits on the edge of the leather boots make him look a little bit scuffed up. Doesn't have to be anything too fancy. And again, if you do too much, all you do is you just go back and glaze the black back over it, and that will dull it all back down again. I feel like I want just a little bit more of this color. I can see a spot that got missed. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. There it is, right in there. There's a spot that got missed. So I'm going to try to reach this brush in there and fix that mistake. Didn't even have any primer on it. There we go. Happy with that. Borin Ironbrow. Feel like I want to put a little blue highlight on his horns. Why? I don't know. Insanity, I guess. I'm going to give him a little tiny blue line on that horn. One on the other side as well. Funky highlight color. And what else do we need? I don't know. This guy's looking pretty close to done to me. What do you think, Nathan?
Oh, it looks good. Better than mine.
Well, I mean, don't knock yourself down. Like I said, that base coat you've got going on there was really, really nice.
I figure you got more practice than I do, so.
Well, there's that, and I can be hard to follow, I know, because I jump around a lot. Partly to make it so that the paint can dry, but sometimes also because I haven't actually decided what I'm going to do yet. And as I'm going, I'm making up the color scheme, you know?
I'm learning, so that's
Yeah.
the best I can do.
Right on. All right. A little lighter. A few more little dits and dots and dabs. A few more lighter ones on the edge of those boots. I bet you this guy kicks a lot of goblins in the face. Those boots are probably pretty beat up. Alright, I'm happy with that. Very, very dark looking dwarf. With his beat up shield and his healthy looking stabber blade. Oh, I said I was going to highlight the gold again, didn't I? Okay, so I'll grab a little bit of the gold. And just where I had made it dull, I'm going to just put a little glaze of gold to shine it up again. That's probably enough. Wow, by the end of these sessions, the palette is looking pretty full of paint. Okay, I'm starting to feel like you need some cool green gemstones or something. So let's do that for no particular reason. All right, I'm gonna paint the gems black. Gems on the sword, there's 3 on each side. I'm gonna start by painting them completely black. That's always step 1 for me for painting these gems. There we go. Okay. Now we're going to take our Happy Verdigris and we're going to mix that with white. So we get a very, very pale version of this Verdigris color. And we're going to paint the center of each of those gemstones this pale color. So don't completely cover the black, just paint the center of it this color. Now if you're like me, you might not be able to see the gemstones laid out very clearly. And if that's the case, don't worry about it. What I'm going to do is just aim for the center of mass of that black blob and paint it this light color. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cover half of that with the Verdigris blue. And then we're going to cover the half of whatever we just painted with the teal. We're giving a blue-green effect to the gems. Then the final step is going to be to put a bit of a white dot on them to make them look somewhat reflective. There we go. There's our blue-green color. And now I'm going to grab some teal. The key is that this darker blue dot should point towards our light. So our light's this way. This darker dot of color should be on the side of the gemstone towards the light. So it'll look like the light's going through the gem. Giving the illusion that it's transparent. And then the final step is a white reflection dot pointing basically directly at our light source on the gem. And we do that with pure white. Little tiny white dots. So all day, things in the palette have been drying really slowly, so I haven't had any flow improver, but at this particular moment, I probably could use a bit of flow improver. All right, so I think the last thing, I mean, this guy's done, right? So what can we do? We could do some stone color on the base. We do some black around the rim of the base, and we could call him done, ready for our D&D game or whatever game we're playing. I think I will, in the end, give him some glowing red eyes. So what color shall we use? Let's use fire red for glowing red eyes. Ooh, Phoenix red. Phoenix red. That's way too orange, so I like it. That's what I'm going to use. When in doubt, go too far. You can always go back and change it if you don't like it. All right, so I already painted the center of his eyes red. So I'm going to paint like his whole eye effectively this dark red, Phoenix red color, which is a very saturated orange. So I'm going to try to aim carefully right for the center of his eye. And I'm going to paint the whole ball of the eye this orange color. Need to do that on both eyes and somehow do it without hitting the shield, hit the helmet, or anything else. Seem to have achieved that. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm take some of this orange. I'm going to put some pure white into it. What that's going to do is give me a much higher value version of the same pigment. And we're going to paint a dot of that in the center of what we just painted. And if you don't want to do glowing eyes, don't. I'm about to paint like another 4 orange dots in this guy's eye socket. If you don't want to do that, I recommend you don't start the process. There we go. So now we got 2 beady little orange eyes in the eye socket there. And now I'm going to paint the centers of the eyes white. Then afterwards, I'm going to paint them orange again. There we go. I'm going to paint them orange again. And then after that, I bet you can guess what I'm going to do. I'm going to paint them white one more time, right in the middle. So I've got a really saturated orange zone in his eyeball. And now I'm going to come back and paint that zone so that the focal, there's like one single point, which is like the light source in the center of that, in the center of all that. And it'll look like his eyes are glowing. Because, you know, underground dwarf evil. Maybe. Or not. Maybe he's a good guy. But if I am the player character playing this guy, he would be evil. But he'd definitely be on a redemption arc. There we go. Glowing red eyes. And I think we can call him pretty much done at that point. You can always go back and touch up a little more, but sometimes you just need to acknowledge that the figure is done. Done is good enough. In this case, I think it is. There he is. There's our deep dwarf. Okay, we're going to call it there. And I will finish his base on my own time. And we'll post some final photos of him when we post the video. All right. Thanks for following along. I would say see you next week, but we're not having a next week. The next one of these will be in June. And in the meantime, if you do have a suggestion for a mini you'd like to see painted, message me on Facebook or send me an email, info@hecatina.ca. If you want to paint this figure, it's available from Reaper. There should be a link in the description below. And if you're interested in painting classes or talking more about painting, I recommend the Miniature Monthly Patreon. Or if you want some painting classes, you can always get a hold of me through my website. We do like on-call, one-on-one online painting classes. And we'll see you again.